Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for coming to this special event. So my name is Emire Cihan Yüksel, and I'm an associate professor of history. And this year, I'm the acting director of the Arab American Educational Foundation Center for Arab Studies. So before talking briefly about the center and our activities, I want to acknowledge that I'm actually representing here two prominent colleagues who are not in the room, but I have to acknowledge them, I think. I'm serving as the acting director of the center because the founding director of the center, Dr. Abdelrazak Takriti, is currently at Brown University for his research and writing sabbatical year. In the meantime, Dr. Hossam Boulala, who is the main organizer of this lecture, as the chair of Arab American Educational Foundation and Burhan and Mrs. Misako Ajouz professorship of Arab Studies, is also currently away for his sabbatical at London and with another very prestigious fellowship in his field in literature. So they left me. So we'll see how it goes. So the Center for Arab Studies became active less than 2 years ago and has managed to establish its international reputation as a hub for intellectual exchange, cutting-edge scholarship, commitment to both local and global communities, and the best in creative work, again, locally and globally. In spite of the limitations of lockdown, we have established 3 recurring annual lectures, celebrated a grand opening attended by local dignitaries and scholars from across the globe, and put together a can't-miss series of online events. The primary driver of the center is Houston's Arab community, who sustains us through energy and financial support. This special relationship allows our center to operate independently to represent our region and its diasporas without external constraints. Special thanks go this evening to the Arab American Educational Foundation and to the Dr. Burhan Ajouz and Mrs. Misako Ajouz professorship for making this evening possible. Thank you, Dr. Ajouz. Characteristic of the work our center does is sophisticated, specialized interest in multiple aspects of Arab life and culture across the Middle East and among the Arab diaspora. That sophistication is on display this evening as we gather to discuss the most recent poetry of 2 of the most celebrated US poets of Arab descent, both of whom happen to be members of our community. Fady Joudah is a Palestinian American physician, poet, and translator, besides being my neighbor. So, Joudah's debut collection of poetry, The Earth in the Attic, 2008, won the 2007 Yale Series of Younger Poets competition. Joudah followed his second book of poetry, A Light, with Text 2, a collection of poems written on a cell phone wherein each piece is exactly 160 characters long. His fourth collection is Footnotes in the Order of Disappearance. Joudah's fifth and most recent collection, Tethered to Stars, came out in 2021, was selected as a Library Journal Best Book of Poetry of 2021. So, Hayan Charara is a poet, a children's book author, essayist, and editor. And of course, he's a professor in the Honors College at the University of Houston, so we can say go Cougs. So, where he also teaches creative writing. His poetry books are These Trees, These Leaves, This Flower, That Fruit, that came out in 2022. Something Sinister, The Sadness of Others, and The Alchemist's Diary. His children's book, The Three Lucies, received the New Voices Award honor, and he edited Inclined to Speak, an anthology of contemporary Arab American poetry. With Dr. Fady Joudah, he is also a serious editor of the Ethel Adnan Poetry Prize. And for this special occasion, Dr. Sally Connolly will be our moderator. So Dr. Sally Connolly is an associate professor of English, again, one of ours at the University of Houston, and associate dean of student and faculty success for the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Her first book, Grief and Meter, Elegies for Poets After Odin, was the first ever critical study of the elegies that poets write for each other. Her second book, Wrenches of Isolation, Transatlantic Poetry, considers the sometimes vexed nature of transatlantic poetic relations in a series of wide-ranging essays. She's currently working on a book about the poetry of the AIDS epidemic, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, okay. So, and before leaving the podium to our speakers and presenters, I need to acknowledge, I want to thank to the outstanding work of one of our graduate students, Randel Khalil, and she was somewhere around here. And of course, our tireless assistant director, Fady Kafiti. So, and I'm not sure if Andre is here, but Andre Kapp, who is the business administrator of English department, so he was behind every single decision, I guess. And the Hilton staff in making this event possible. Thank you for all of your hard work. So without further ado, I will leave the podium, the floor to Dr. Connolly. So, yes, okay.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm delighted you could join us here for this wonderful event. I'm very excited to get to speak to actual real-life poets. One of the things about being a professor of contemporary poetry is that you write away about contemporary poets, and then when you get to meet them, you get to tell them what you think their poetry means. They tell you are absolutely wrong. So I look forward to being corrected repeatedly this evening. So I think what's going to happen is that Fady and Hayan are going to read a couple of their poems, and then we're going to have an opportunity to discuss them with them. I'm going to let my burning inquisitiveness let me ask them a couple of questions before we open it up to the floor and to hear from you. So who is going to read first? Are we doing it alphabetically? Do you need a microphone? Or use it up?
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am going to ask for your attention. I will be reading a somewhat narrative poem, mixed narrative and lyric. It's a little long, might take 9 minutes or so. So put on your concentration hats. The title, The Holy Embraces the Holy, is from a line by the late poet, Jordanian poet Amjad Nasser, who passed away two years ago. And it is from a long poem of his on Petra. And it is one of the most marvelous poems on place I have ever read. So here we go. So it is, I guess, Sally and I were talking before, and we were talking about correspondences with other poets. I will not read the numbers of the sections. I will just pause, hopefully. You'll figure out. That you have nothing to say, your deep sadness reserves me as a den reserves a security blanket. That in the mirror I see you. You were not there. Your silence was a mask. I read from it. The studies done so far have not been good. We agree. More research is needed, more money allocated, so that we practice what we return to when we say, "Don't judge me. I took LSD once." I experienced no visual or auditory hallucinations. The drop possibly had no drop in it, or maybe the vendor thought to protect my friend, a young medical doctor then, from herself. Or she overpaid, or the hit was a gift. We went hiking. There was a rattlesnake, and I heard what it had to say. April snow was melting in Zion National Park. We had no wet or dry suits. I saw two currents meet, one held off the other. At the interface, a mirror. God's face in slow-mo plumes of dirt and gravel. Then, in a self-contained area blinded by a bluff, we came across a woman calling out to Bob. He was her husband, she said. She could have been Japanese, had an accent as I have an accent with certain names. We offered her a few discerning glances into the woods before my friend whispered one of Zeno's paradoxes to me. Which story do we want to see through on acid? 6 months later, in Paracas, with the same friend, before I became the son of the mother who loved me or loved me not, we visited the national park on the Pacific. The resort was where stone desert is alive with sea and no greenery negotiated life. Mindfully, we went about acquiring more debt. Dinner was included, but we didn't have enough for lunch or breakfast. Complimentary tea or coffee with warm bread and rolls of salted butter was what the Queen said we could eat. That was totally unintentional. By the third morning, we went for the gratis like it was a jugular. That your sadness was a silence and your silence no mask. That you have become epic, no chronology sustains you. In Paracas, I shroomed, no hallucination. My grip on reality was wicked. The waves delivered the gust to the shore, and I summoned my magic carpet, straddled it like a bike, my tiptoes on the ground. On the cliffs, a fleet of red condors pulled out their panopticons for the seals 100 meters below. The wind was an exalted rubble off the edge. With their wingspan, some condors rose as if free-falling, then floated above waiting. Condor Legion, the air squadron that bombed Guernica. Historians, when they are camp followers of empire. Poets, when empire's tragic clowns. For dinner, freshly caught large sea bass worthy of display for the dining room guests. We did not tip the waiters. We were not yet the great doctors of America. The driver we tipped. He played our kind of music on the car radio and took us to a cave where water cymbals crashed into stone and nearby fishermen pitched their rods along the shore like streetlights. That you have nothing to say, that your deep sadness is free to be deeply sad near me, some of what love is for. The week before, we'd been on the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. The stuff about altitude sickness is real, but so is the stuff about cocoa leaves. We ascended into mist, then frigid rain. After long rain, a full moon made love to snow-capped mountains in a cloudless sky. In the sacred city, I wanted to visit the moon temple on Huayna Picchu. Time said I had to take the hill running and hopping at a comfortable nonstop pace so that I might make the last bus down to Aguas Calientes. On my way up, I passed a depleted man sitting on a rock. His half-life was visible in a plastic water bottle. On my descent, he was near the top, a decaying wolf who couldn't blow a house down. I stopped to water time. He gulped, said he was French, asked me where I was from. Did he say French, or did I infer it from the few words he muttered in his deep state of rapid heartbeat and mediocre oxygen exchange. He asked me first, after I insisted he'd take an extra gulp from my canteen for heart and lungs to turn serene. I took his question to mean that he wanted to credit my kindness to a place when he gets to tell his story. I gave the credit to Palestine. His face, which had been a theater of struggle, went blank. Suddenly, he was playing poker alone. Did I have a face? Could I have passed for several options? Algerian, Spanish, or could I have been an Afrikaner? Maybe Palestine was the last thing he expected to hear, or his face had nothing to do with the word. Maybe he anticipated American first and foremost because I did say water. Then that in the mirror I pulled up your hands. A pose you've shadowed all your life isn't always a pose. That your hands were all water, all night. Light was with us, stabbing us in the back. Years passed for years. Into a patient's room, I introduced myself with an apology. For 2 weeks, he'd been a hopeful captive subjected to the merry-go-round of doctors, a dying man with another dead person's heart that gave him all it could. In this world, a person is rarely transplanted more than once. Yes, was the transplanted man's response. You guys are like clowns in a van. Faceless, as in fairness he was to me, I burst out laughing. A few days and he mentioned endings. Said that a chaplain randomly assigned to his floor asked him if he wanted to speak about faith. The chaplain was Muslim, Ali, and the patient was not that kind of Texan. If only more Muslims were this nice, the world would be a better place, the transplanted Lone Star said to me. Leaning against the wall, hands behind my back, I nodded in cold agreement. You're he asked. I nodded, yes, neither one of us uttering the word. And you have a sense of humor too. The other day you laughed at my joke. He loved sailing. That you have nothing to say, from the unrequited to the unconditional to the imaginary. That your sadness unbuttons my heart, needs its clowns. That a heart remains a heart in its beyond. So thanks for, and apologize for any mispronunciations. Raul and Roberto, I was thinking, oh, I screwed up the pronunciations. I'm gonna say he's, I'll read shorter ones, I suppose. I like to read this one. It's a short one called Black Hole. The book Tethered to Stars takes the title from, reverses a famous line by Imrul Qais in one of his, in his Mu'allaqa, where he says that the night is long because the earth is tethered to the stars by linen ropes. And I thought that whether, I was telling Sally, whether whether the earth spins around the world or the world spins around the earth, we are just the same, tethered to stars. So this one is, there are zodiac titles here and whatnot. This one's called Black Hole. Of impermanence, on whose edges the last escape is infinite. If it is death, this destiny offers me, and in its tail end a conduit to another realm in which time spins differently than we've known it to pass. A purpose that heaven and hell served for as long as they could before they ran out of gas, with no wormhole out of God to show for. An extinguished imagination masquerades as exchangeable commodity. Sometimes a pit grows a supermassive mouth, can swallow its children, but doesn't. And Sally asked me to read this one, so I'll read it. It's a correspondence also. It's a famous echo of Gwendolyn Brooks. So this one's called Neon. It'll be the last one. We rock bottom, we simulacrum, we nothing but air, we divan. We styrofoam, we fashion spume, om and om, we divan. We pyramid eat, we worship sweet, we belly kiss and dimple hips, gin and wine, we divan. Thank you.
Thank you, Fady. I've read with Fady so many times. I've lost track how many times, and I know for sure that I've spent more time with this poet than with any other, and I'm grateful for it. I'm glad to be alive and writing at the same time as you. And I was thinking when Sally's bio was being spoken about elegies for other poets, and I hope I die first and you write one for me. Right? I don't want it to be the other way around. Okay, so I'll read a handful of poems, maybe less. This is I'll start with a short one titled 1979. We were stopped at a red light. I was in the passenger seat, and the guy crossing the street looked at the Buick, then at us, flipped us the middle finger, and said, "Go home, camel jockeys." However hard I try, I can't remember if then and there what the guy said made any difference to me. I was 7. What did I know about crisis? As for the guy, before the light turned green, my father floored the pedal and ran him over. Some more neighbors. This is a poem titled Neighbors, and it's in 4 parts. George killed men in the war. Which men, which war, he doesn't say, and I don't ask. The flowers in his yard, poppies or anemones, remain the most beautiful on the street. The brothers next door celebrate with shots to the moon. Falling rain wets their foreheads, their shingled rooftop, the tall pines rising above the chimney, the soaring tips of their bullets. The chemistry or calculus teacher, Janet or Janice, her dog shits on my grass. She never picks up after. The one time I said something at the curb, she told me her son, tall and handsome, had turned on himself. She touched her temple, went this way, straight through. The accountant can't get rid of the vine creeping and covering the shrubs alongside his house. After the divorce, he stopped on a bridge, leaned and let the weight slip into a current flowing fast to the Atlantic. So I'll read this poem with gratitude to Fady, Fady's usually one of the first and only readers of my poems before I decide that they're finished. I have a couple of other people, but I trust Fady more than most. And you won't know necessarily, and I don't even remember, but his hands are on this poem here and there. The problem with me is the problem with you. A dog outside barks loudly. Inside, everything quiet. I said I would not, but here I am looking. Dogs snarling and lunging at men naked and hooded. Animals don't know shame, and mine I love, but not so much because love, like oil, spreads thin, clings to the heart, the mind, I don't know. And I suspect when I leave her for days on end, she gets depressed. No woman has ever watched me close the door with such sad eyes. Yes, I've changed the subject. Driving to the airport, I think these days people long for what is happening to make sense or to make sense of what is happening. For example, the woman holding the leash is smiling while the man attached to it tries to hide his shame. Sometimes men want to be like nature, all around, hanging, falling to pieces, the leaves of oak, pine, maple, magnolia, and cypress. Too many to count. There will be leaves to bag when I return home. And yes, men in foreign lands will be sent home, and for each his own means of delivery, a seat, a plastic bag. Days like today, times like these, I don't want a damn thing to do with victims. In the terminal, through the windows, the twilight almost imperceptible, evening coming on quickly, and the color of the sky I don't notice. Waiting, I look around. Nothing here compares to anything there. I may look like them, these men who grow old by torture, but I'm not. On the long flight, I take the aisle for comfort and the illusion of safety, and I leave the view to the woman watching beside me, watching me. She looks like someone I would make small talk for, buy a drink. I speak kindly and act like the weather as much prophecy as science, and like the weather, what makes me frightening, terror in her heart, her mind, is invisible, capable of being identified or anticipated only by those in the know. She has big brown eyes, and I believe that she believes at my mercy she will thrive or perish. I reduce myself to cliches. When she says nothing at all, I talk about the weather. I think she's an expert of sorts. Everyone knows something about someone, and the wise interpret for those who cannot read the signs. Turbulence ahead, trouble to come, and on every horizon, a disappearance. So I'm going to read just two more poems, and this one is the longest piece in the new book, and it's called Fugue. I can't read it all. It would take almost 15, 20 minutes, but I'm going to read a handful of excerpts from this, and I'll begin by reading you, I have a few notes in the back of the book, very few, but I have a note for Fugue. And I'll read you the 2 notes for Fugue. I'll read you the notes and then read you a few excerpts. Here's the note. Fugue is comprised of interweaving quotes, at times slightly modified from the following sources. So these are the works that Fugue comes from. The book, on the taboo of knowing against knowing, on the taboo of let me start over. The book on the taboo against knowing who you are, and The Way of Liberation, essays and lectures on the transformation of the self, both by Alan Watts. Don't Ask, a collection of interviews with Philip Levine, the poet, and Sven Lindqvist's A History of Bombing. Fugue also contains a single excerpt from What Every Person Should Know About War by Chris Hedges. The word fugue has 2 distinct senses, the first grounded in music, the second in psychiatry. Here's the first definition. Fugue is a polyphonic composition constructed of 1 or more short subjects or themes, which are harmonized according to the laws of counterpoint and introduced from time to time with various contrapuntal devices. The second definition of fugue, a flight from one's own identity, often involving travel to some unconsciously desired locality. Life is a game, the first rule of which is that this is not a game. It's deadly serious. Nothing more obvious than what our politicians do to our language. So if we insist on the truth, on an accurate rendition, a faithful use of language, if we insist on an accurate depiction of people's lives as they actually live them, this becomes a political act. When we played, it was always war. In our hands, any old stick was a weapon, pine cones were bombs. If everyone plays war, said my mother, there will be war. She was right, there was. True creation is always purposeless, without ulterior motive. Your whole notion of reality is just a lie. Your country isn't what you had been told it was. The others aren't what you'd been told they were. Nobody is what you'd been told they were. The past is utter horseshit. In the beginning was the bomb. If you look at Jan van Eyck's painting of the Last Judgment, everybody in heaven is completely bored, sitting there looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. Rows and rows of them with the Lord God Almighty presiding and looking equally bored. All those stately people in heaven are destined to stay in church forever, in an obvious state of ultimate boredom. But down below there is a bat-winged skull, spreading out its ghastly wings, and all nude bodies writhing, being eaten by snakes and each other. An orgy. We have never admitted that our idea of heaven is a perfectly useless state. The other day I was sitting on the train with a young woman and she began talking about mime, about these problems she would work on, all very vague at first. So I said, what the hell is a real problem? Tell me. She said, looking in someone's eyes. It was startling. So much of being a poet is looking other people in the eyes, looking yourself in the eyes, accepting vulnerability. It's better that women and children die than they become hysterical and create panic. Bang, you're dead. It's for the best. The ego sees, hears sounds. The ego sees sights, hears sounds, feels feelings, and has experiences. These are common but redundant ways of talking. For seeing a sight is just seeing. Hearing a sound is just hearing. Feeling a feeling is just feeling. And having an experience is just experiencing. That these redundant phrases are so commonly used shows that most people think of themselves as separate from their thoughts and experiences. You said John Berryman taught you a lot about poetry and its importance. How did he think poetry was important? He was able to pick up the newspaper full of Eisenhower, John Foster Dulles, Joe McCarthy, and the various American idiots of our time, and he'd say, "Kids, this will pass. These idiots will be replaced by other idiots. Don't worry about it." Then he'd put alongside that paper the poems of John Keats and say, "This will not pass as long as our language is spoken. Some things are transient, and some things come close to being permanent. Don't lose sight of that." And yet, from the beginning, genocide is inscribed in our earliest and holiest texts: the Old Testament, the Iliad, the Aeneid. These are your instructions. The startling truth is that our best efforts for civil rights, international peace, population control, conservation of natural resources, and assistance to the starving of the earth, urgent as they are, will destroy rather than help if made in the present spirit. For as things stand, we have nothing to give. If our own riches and our own way of life are not enjoyed here, they will not be enjoyed elsewhere. Peace can be made only by those who are peaceful. Love can be shown only by those who love. No work of love will flourish out of guilt, fear, or hollowness of heart, just as no valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now. Good poems demand to be written from inside the poet. What happens with most political poems is that poets in certain situations think a poem is needed and they are obliged to sit down and write it, producing crap. One very important way in which men can attain joy, freedom, happiness, even delirium and ecstasy, is by not staying home with wife and family, even to the point where often enough they are only too happy to give up their nearest and dearest in favor of war. To paraphrase the gospel, love your competitors and pray for those who undercut your prices. The political and personal morality of the West, especially in the United States, is, for lack of this sense, utterly schizophrenic. It is a monstrous combination of uncompromising idealism and unscrupulous gangsterism, and thus devoid of the humor and humanness which enables confessed rascals to sit down together and work out reasonable deals. No one can be moral. No one can harmonize contained conflicts without coming to a working arrangement between his rows above and his manure below. One of the most attractive qualities about a poem is its ambition. Bang, you're dead, we said. Now you're dead, we said. I'm gonna leave you with one more poem. I know I went longer than Mr. Modesty here. I have a number of self-portraits in the book, and this is one of them. This poem was accepted. I like to tell this story, and apologies if you feel the same way that the Poetry Foundation felt. It was accepted by the guest editor, Fatima Ashkar, who's a poet, and then she wrote back and said, "We can't use it because the Academy said it's obscene." And I know there's maybe more than one way to understand obscene, but I always understood obscene in its sort of classical sense, and that is that something that arouses sexual curiosities. There's just no way that this poem does that. So I think they just meant profane, not obscene. But they didn't take it. They said we can't publish it. And I understand. I think this is the Poem a Day series, and it goes to schools and, I don't know. Whatever, my kids have heard this before and they're fine. Anyway, another journal took it. Ironically, the oldest journal in the United States published it. Self-portrait with curses at 35,000 feet. On a flight to Detroit, the guy next to me told me about his shitty job, his dumb, slobbering dog, his good-for-nothing kids, 2 of them assholes, and his lying, cheating wife. Moving at 500 miles per hour above the earth without feeling it, I listened to him go on and on, his pain from bad to worse. To what wisdom does suffering give birth? And must we always learn from it? Earlier that morning, my mother had died, and going back to her once and for all, I would find out. But first, I had to suffer Bob. Fucking Bob. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions that have occurred to me while you're reading those poems and then open it up to the floor. So first, Fady, you do write about being a physician in your poetry. And there's a tradition of physician poets starting, well, for my purview, with someone like William Carlos Williams, and then recently we've got Rafael Campo, Cedar Young. So what is it, is there something in the physician's cast of mind that inclines it towards poetry? Is there something diagnostic that you're doing? And I mean, I think both you and Hayan have quite didactic poems, but what is there something there? What do you think is going on with that sort of diagnostic, curative aspect?
I don't know. I think that maybe John Keats was he failed out of medical school. That's why he lives in time and I won't. I think that it's there's this thing about you're smart, you can go to medical school, and then you find out, well, maybe I'm smart in other things and not necessarily in medical school. But the language of science is, I consider it like it's a new language. It's it opened up in my mind my love for language. And I didn't realize that those who had written the language of modern medicine were incredible writers. When you read old texts by Sir William Osler, you realize that his description of pneumonia just makes you want to have it. I mean, it's and so I think that's part of it. But then you get to practice it, and you realize that you're facing the thing that we all face and we all deny, which is our own fear of death and loss of pleasure and all these struggles and loss of control. And it's overwhelming to ignore it. I don't know about the diagnostic thing. I don't know if there is a poetry that is not diagnostic. It just depends on what it prescribes, and the prescription perhaps is where the differences take place. But I don't know if that answers it.
I'll add to this. I wonder if the idea of like diagnosis is, I'm not sure how a doctor thinks about it, and you can tell me, right? But I think that there's some connection to what some poets do, which is, and writers and artists and others, and that is to see what's in front of you, to look at the world before you and make sense of it. And there are usually various possibilities that are present there, right? So there's something of the diagnostic, to use that word, but it has obviously a different goal, perhaps at the end. I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right. I think the poet and the doctor comes first, and then you find out that you're a poet, and then you have all this other knowledge and experience, and how can you not use it? And I think since we discovered fire, we have been diagnostician for better and for worse.
Can I ask you a question? Of course. Wonder what is that? While the doctor speaker was going through acid, mushrooms, cocoa leaves, what else? What was going on there? You don't have to answer that. No,
it's. I mean, It's nice.
We'll have to take a word for that.
Sure.
Thank you. So in fugue, so you've got the idea of fugue as a musical form, which is contrapuntal, and then you've got the idea of fugue as a psychological state. And you're orchestrating meaning. You've got all of these quotes. I'm really interested in how you're doing that and what you're juxtaposing and how you're selecting that. And you also say in that, or you do not say, that the poem says, and I don't know who you're quoting, if indeed you are, what happens with most political poems is that the poet, in certain situations, think a poem is needed, and they are obliged to sit down and write it, producing crap. But I think your poetry, Hayan, and Fady's poetry is a wonderful example of the fact that political poems are not crap at all. I mean, you're writing incredibly powerful political poems. So how much are you agreeing with these sort of assertions in fugue? I'm quite curious. You've also got a famous poet that says, you need these three things in poetry. You worry about poetry and if it will endure and what it can do in this poem.
Yeah. I'll answer by giving you a little bit of the background to how the poem was made. And it was not a poem to begin with, and I still have some hesitancy about calling it a poem. I began this the fall after the invasion of Lebanon in July of 2006. And my father was living there at the time. My grandfather died in the war. My father's hometown was decimated for like the 5th time in his lifetime. And the last thing, and I just happened to that year quit smoking. I couldn't write without a cigarette, and so I didn't write because I didn't want to smoke. And I felt this urgency, this need to write something about what my family had gone through after, right? The war ended at the end of July, and it was now fall, so a few months later. At the time this was happening, I had no interest in writing about it. I was just calling to make sure my family was still alive. I was in a class and we were bringing in articles and interviews from other poets and poetry criticism. This is what we were talking about. And I think that stuff is important. I teach it, I think about it, but I didn't want to talk about that. So I brought in these writings by the people who are in fugue, and presented it in this way that you heard it, and just said to my fellow poets, you deal with this. I'm not going to tell you who said what. And partly because these are ideas that are also borrowed and taken and reshuffled. And over 10 to 12 years, I kept adding to it and rearranging. So everything in that poem is someone else's wording, someone else's idea, but I've changed it slightly here and there, and I've rearranged the language so that they're speaking to each other. And so, a piece from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago is not only speaking to our present moment, but perhaps also to, a piece about war. Making the claim that our instructions for genocide are found in the Bible, in the great Western texts. That also speaks to a conversation that a poet and a mime have on the subway. And that also speaks to a Buddhist Anglican priest telling us about our sense of self and the illusion of the self. Anyway, these are conversations that I think inform not only how we understand each other, but also how we think about poetry, how we think about politics, and so on and so forth. I don't even know if I've really answered the question, but I'll just add this. And I'm sorry, like me being a teacher is coming out now. I'm taking up so much time and space here, but I do buy into so much of what we teach people about poetry, but I also understand that we need to walk away from those teachings as well. They aren't rules. They are, at best, like suggestions, codes that people used to live by that may or may not apply anymore. You're welcome.
So I really love Neon that you read for us this evening. And obviously, it, as you said, draws on Gwendolyn Brooks's We Real Cool, which is an interesting, very brief poem that begins playfully but ends with "We dead soon." You know, that this is what happens. And in yours, you've got this sort of playfulness of language, but you're also writing about the divan. The idea of divan ends 3 of your stanzas, correct? Could you just tell us a little bit about it? Because from my understanding, this is, again, one of those moments where I might be told I'm dead wrong, but am I correct in saying that's like an Arabic collection of poetry, the divan, yeah? And how are you playing on that? Because, I mean, you're not using Arab forms really, but you are thinking of this sort of like constellation of poems. And I want to talk to you as well about your use of stars and constellations, because you've got astronomy and astrology, and you're sort of bringing the two together, whereas normally people are very keen to keep them apart. So, sorry, that's 2 questions.
Yeah, I in the divan, or in Arabic the word is diwan, and I sometimes I like to leave little, I guess, Easter eggs for myself in my poems. I think divan in the Arabic comes from the Persian, and some people may disagree. It was a word that was introduced after, it wasn't pre-Islamic, it was after. And then it comes to mean several things in English, or a couple of things, not just that. And also, divan in Arabic or Persian means a collection of things. Also could mean a gathering or of people in a particular setting. So because I was corresponding with Gwendolyn Brooks, I wanted to also play on the sound, and so the we divan is also we divine, but it is a creation of an accent that doesn't really exist. But I wanted that echo to grow. So there are these little playful pleasures that are the reason why I write poetry in the first place, really. As for the astronomy and the astrology, it in part it goes back to, I grew up, Arabic's my first language. Then English, then the scientific language in English, and it was, and it's Greek and Latin mutations. And I think that, for example, that poem Black Hole, and this whole conversation about a black hole is a place where gravity is so strong that even light can't escape it. And we don't know what happens when you go in. You're destroyed. But Hawking says, well, the information can't be lost, so what happens to information? And it sounds to me like a modern description of heaven and hell without the the rituals and the retributions and so forth. And because we are humans, as Rilke says, we are only mouth. Because we are limited by language. The echo of language through the centuries, no matter what we learn through science, sometimes sounds like something that was already said before, but without the scientific method. So playing off astronomy and astrology for me allows me to kind of investigate those private spaces of knowledge for me as a poet. Allows me to tell stories or be lyrical or tragic or a real nerd. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask one last question, and then there's going to be audience Q&A. I'm going to have to leave shortly, but I think that will be taken over. Hayan, I'd like to finally ask you, so you're, as much as the constellation is an ordering device in your collection, the idea of self-portraiture is a thread that pervades throughout yours. You have several self-portraits. Would you mind just talking to us a little bit about the idea of self-portraiture and self-reflection that you have in your poems?
I'll try to be brief. I think these self-portraits are not really self-portraits. And what I mean by this is, on the one hand, in some ways, any poem a person writes is an inward look. It is a reflection of something that comes from within the poet and is simply an outward expression. In that way, they are self-portraits. But I've always tried not to center myself in my poems. I just don't think I'm that interesting of a person as a subject, and I'm far more interested in other people. And so the self-portraits in this book are really about encounters with other people. I've always included other people in my poems from the very beginning, because I think I learn about myself and about the world, through others more than I can simply on my own. And it really was just a vehicle, a way to do some more of that, that inner, outer reflecting, something along those lines.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand this over now. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to read your book, so I'm glad I had the occasion to do so. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that I have to depart.
Thank you so much. So I think we have 15 minutes for Q&A. Yes. Okay. So I will try to help them. So, yes, please. You might need the microphone. Oh, okay. Let me see
that. Soren Kierkegaard, he said in his book, The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air, he discusses this idea of, are poets heroes? That made me think. And I asked a Persian poet this question, and he said to me, for us, in our tradition, the question is not, are poets heroes? Our poets are the heroes. So I'm wondering, from an Arab perspective, would you say the same, or do you have a different approach to that?
Again, people will read Kierkegaard and they won't read a shit I have written in 100 years. That's generous. But I do think that he was also trapped in his particularity of time. I am not entirely sure that we live a moment where poets are heroes. I'm not sure what the definition of a hero is. I think that poets are many things. They cannot be just one thing. And they are sometimes great translators of the language that a collective heart speaks. Whether somebody decides that that's heroic or not, I don't know. I think there's a conservatism in referring to poets as heroes that relates to millennia or long tradition in human history, that all sorts of poets are heroes in various definitions of the word. Maybe a mystic is a hero, but so I don't know what exactly we mean by hero, and I don't know what, we can talk later, what Kierkegaard, what conclusion he reached in that book that I have not read, just to spite him because he's more famous than I am. But I do think that we ask these questions in the 20th, 19th, 21st century, whatever, based on a civilizational construct of the nation state. And they are incredibly political questions, and they don't need to be, in my opinion. A poet is a poet is a poet. You want I may not be a hero, but if I am your hero, I mean, who am I? You know, God help you, but who am I to who am I to tell you I am not? You know, that I think that we are quite taken by these kind of large constructs that, especially like, you know, for someone like me in English, how can it not be an imposed political question on me as a Palestinian writing in English or even speaking in English? Which American which American poet considers themselves a hero?
I could say.
Huh?
I don't know. I couldn't
Yeah,
say.
but I mean, no, I'm not, you know, I'm not quizzing you. But I'm saying, you know, but it's interesting that the question now is asked of those who are not American.
Yeah.
Is my answer.
Well, that wasn't my aim. It was just a curiosity.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Something I had to wonder as well. Like,
Yeah.
do I see poets as heroes? You know?
I'll answer it
Yeah.
slightly differently, and so I teach a course in which we do great books, and Kierkegaard would be one. But we're reading right now Homer's Iliad, and the hero, as defined by Homer's era, is the person who's most excellent at killing other people, is the person who is most willing to die for honor and glory. And those, I mean, my students often have such a difficult time understanding why these people are placed not only on pedestals, but talked about as if they were gods. So the definition of the hero today is obviously very different. And it depends on, say, who you're asking and where you're coming from. As far as American poets go, whatever the American sensibility has decided a hero is, largely speaking, generally speaking, I don't think poets are part of that. I mean, we are just not there. We are not on a pedestal. I don't think we're in the same stadium as the American heroic character is. For better or worse, perhaps, I don't know.
Just real quick, do you think Homer was a hero?
First of all, I'll just answer it this way. We don't even know if Homer was a person. His poems have been read as if, as in part, not entirely, but in part as records of a heroic era. I can say that.
So at this point, I think we need to take another question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Please, go ahead.
Thank you for your reading, for both of you. Since you've read together, you know each other's work for so many years, I would love to hear you talk, and I'm taking up Hayan's invitation, if you could tell us a little bit about what that particular relationship is. It's very rare, especially as one gets older as an artist, that you share your work with one other artist. And there's a kind of code or an ethics that takes place. And I wonder if you could share with us how that looks like between the two of you or from different perspectives.
We can both speak simultaneously. I'll say this. I'm very, and I'll apologize, I do every time. When Fady sends me a poem, it often takes me days, weeks to respond, if I even respond. Whereas he responds somehow with his, I don't know how he does it, usually the minutes. So it's a very imbalanced relationship, and I try to give it other ways. And I don't want to sound too sappy here, but Fady is dearer to me than family. I love him as a human being. I love his mind, the way he thinks. And he's a passionate, compassionate person, poet, and someone, again, it's sincere to say that I'm glad that he's in my life because he affects the way that I think. And we have conversations regularly, sometimes on text. Fady has the thing where he actually speaks into the text, and I get to hear his voice. I don't like to do that, so I type back. And then we'll pick up the phone and call. So we speak regularly. I mean, we're in constant contact with each other, and our ideas are, I think, necessarily going to influence each other. I won't tell him anything about, say, sports, or team to like or not, but when it comes to we talk about the big questions often. I mean, we can be, we're pals in lots of other ways, but it's very easy for our conversations to go deep. And it's so rewarding. You don't get to have that kind of friendship usually. You usually have it in professional settings, right? So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think Hayan for me is I mean he's more important than poetry, and that's such a relief. No, I mean really, I think that we share a particular estrangement sometimes. Waking up in an America obsessed with the Arab corpus. And sometimes it's just nice to feel a particular soothing openness with a dear heart such as his, and that really opens up spaces for our poetry. Sometimes because we talk about it, and sometimes because we don't. It's just sort of implicit. But it's a wonderful thing I think, for poets to sort of go through their lives as close friends and not necessarily, Wordsworth and Coleridge kind of thing, where we have to, figure out. We get caught in the performance of our, heroic presence. Speaking of that, I feel there's another dear friend, Joudah Haji, and I feel something he said to me, I feel describes my relationship with Hayan, which is, I think we live our hours and we write our stuff as if we are communicating in the future with our dead selves. And I don't mean that morbidly at all. It's a way of freeing ourselves from the shackles of the present.
Can I end? I saw this. Somebody sent me this, and this is something Samuel Beckett said. In the afterlife, we'll sit around talking about the good old days when we wished that we were dead.
So, please go.
Who is the poet that you think had the most influence on each of you? I mean, the one you admire the most and you think that has influence on you, each one.
It's really hard to think of just one name. I used to, and please do not let the religious police know, but I used to read the Quran a lot, and when I was younger, during Ramadan. And to me, and to this day, I return to my memories of the language of that book, because there are so many qualities of being in that text that open up the mind to the lyric and the poetic in ways that I only understood when I stopped reading the Quran and I came to the States and I became a doctor and so forth. The entire there is a I know you want a name. I'll give you a name, so I'll scratch that itch. But the music in the mind is what poetry is to me. I was a child who my father or uncle would ask me to memorize certain poems, and I realized at a young age that this made me so happy. And so I was always, and I still am, in search of a music that brings me that kind of serenity and euphoria that I did or experienced as a child. So as with names, the idea of the serenity and the euphoric, they change with time as we change. It's the same thing with the heroic question. You ask one question and you say, which one influenced you the most? And I know you may not mean it this way, but it suggests a closure, as if somehow like the whole thing ended and then it was all me after that. And there's always a continuation. The poets I read now in Arabic or in English are not poets I read when I was younger. And thank God I found them late, because I'm so tired of the old ones. Obviously, everybody probably in the Arab world, whether they liked it or not, or liked him or not, grew up with Darwish. In English, it's fascinating to me that my first attraction was to someone like Rilke. Time moves on.
I know the Queen died today of England, and she was not a poet as far as I know. But I'm sure there were people who were saddened by it. Sally is someone, and this is where she comes from. And I asked her about it, and she said she shed a tear for her. I responded the same way some years ago on February 14th when Philip Levine died. If you don't know who Philip Levine is, I urge you to look up his poems. And I was a third-year student at Wayne State University, ready to take my MCATs to maybe consider medical school. And I found a book of Philip Levine's poems, and I sat in the bookstore for about an hour or so reading them. And I broke my parents' heart within a week when I told them I don't want to be a doctor anymore. I'm going to be a poet. You could imagine how they responded to a 19-year-old saying he was going to become a poet. Even though my mother was a teacher of literature, my father and grandfather could recite thousands of poems, but they wanted a doctor.
So, please.
Thank you for both being here, and my question will be in this territory of nomadic poets. Both of you are Arab Americans, and I'm sure your poetry in English dialogue a lot with poetry in Arabic. And as you mentioned earlier, the idea of diagnosis, or poet is diagnostician, more or less. Since Ruben Dario stamped modernity or modern poetry with the equation of from symbolism to reality. In the Arabic poetry, we have this stamp in different equation, probably from reality to symbolism. And both of you touch base a little bit with some politics, although you try to distance yourself a lot from this idea of victim aesthetics, which is great. And my question to you is the following. How American reader or the Anglophone reader, including the codified one, come about this idea of dialogue, of dialogism between two registers of poetry, the Arabic one and the English one?
Fady is the sage on this one, really. You are. I mean, your notion, your thinking that you've been doing for quite a while now about Palestine in English and Palestine in Arabic, I think is important and answers this in a way that's new for most people. I think you should talk about it.
I think I already feel like I'm going to disappoint you. But I'm
It
already.
wouldn't be the first time. It's okay.
I was going to say I'm already married, so hey. I think that if I want to be blunt and simple and brief, that I do not think that readers on the whole of American poetry or Anglophone poetry of writers who write in this double register as it relates to Arabic have an idea where to begin. And so it reduces us to explaining ourselves like a comedian who tells jokes and then has to explain them. And so the conversation for me is about leaving a record that honors my belief in the art of poetry for a future time. Because I do think that it will open, you require, it's really interesting, for example, to me, and I'll try to articulate this, that we live in an age with this nation-state business where there is a nation of the exiled poets, which is, in a way, did not exist in the same propensity or volume in previous eras. You'll say, oh, but of course so-and-so was and so-and-so was. But we are still trying to understand, to come to grips to these poets who exist in this kind of double register, especially if the double register is not one that is assimilated yet. We only understand the double register when it is assimilated, and we at best work hard to assimilate it. And it does not mean that the work I do will be assimilated, at least not in my lifetime. So, so for me, it's a conversation with human language. And look, I want to tell you this story. In the Modern Language Association, I was invited to be on a panel to speak about the embargo, continued embargo on Palestinian literature. The Modern Language Association, this was a few years ago, was trying to rally its members to vote for the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Against Israel. And so I was speaking with others, and a person in the audience at the end asked me this question. And this is a professor, and I understood later that he was asking the question because, a professor of literature, because he wanted to make sure that nobody misunderstood anything and that I am, a safe dog to pet. The question was, do you believe that Hebrew is capable of love the same way as Arabic? And my answer, I was like, who isn't capable of, like, what are you talking, like, which language would know more or less about love than another language? So you're asking me in this society to have an open conversation about what it means to be a beautiful Arab writing in English? I don't think so. But I will be beautiful and I'll continue to write.
So thank you very much. I think this ends our Q&A section in a beautiful way. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, yes, for your questions.